So should I just start?
No, I'll provide us a brief intro.
Okay, thank you.
Let's wait for not just maybe a minute for everyone to log in.
All right. Oh, I didn't realize that this talk will be a record. Yeah, okay.
It's fine.
Well, it's mainly some preliminary comparison research discussion. So Daya, can you hear us? Okay.
Yes, I can hear you now. I don't know why my desktop is not working, but I'm now using my cell phone and trying to log in with my laptop again.
Okay, cool. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. I think all the students are here now, so good evening, everyone. Good evening from Los Angeles. Good morning to most of you in Taipei and in Manila and in the Philippines, Taiwan and the Philippines. I am Steven Acabado, Associate Professor of Anthropology and the Director of the UCLA Center for Southeast Asian Studies. Welcome to the third talk of the lecture series that is part of the Archaeology of Taiwan and Southeast Asian Maritime Worlds, a class offered both at UCLA and at the International Program on Austronesian Studies at the National Chengchi University. Before I introduce our speaker today, I would like to recognize that as a land-grant institution, the Asia Pacific Center and the Center for Southeast Asian Studies at UCLA acknowledge the Gabrielino Tongva peoples as the traditional land caretakers of Tovangar, Los Angeles Basin, and Southern Channel Islands. Our talk today is co-sponsored by the UCLA Asia Pacific Center, the UCLA Center for Southeast Asian Studies, the International Program on Austronesian Studies at NCCU, and the Center for Taiwan, Philippines, Indigenous Knowledge, Local Knowledge, and Sustainable Studies, CTPILS, also at NCCU. I would like to express my gratitude to our speaker today, who graciously accepted the invitation to meet with the class and give a public talk amid her busy schedule. Our guest speaker is currently an assistant professor at the Institute of Anthropology, National Tsinghua University, a research associate at the National Museum of the Philippines, and a member of the editorial board of the SPAFA Journal, the Southeast Asian Center for Fine Arts and Archaeology. She is an historical archaeologist focusing on trade and colonialism in maritime East and Southeast Asia. She is currently the PI of a project entitled Hermosa, the Philippines, and the World in the Context of Spanish Colonialism, an integrated historical archaeology study of power, religion, and trade networks. I am also proud to say that she is an alumna of the Ifugao Archaeological Project, and I served on her PhD committee at the UCLA Interdepartmental Program in Archaeology. Please welcome Dr. Ellen Xie, who will present her work in Chilong, Taiwan, and unveiling the protohistory of Northern Taiwan, the archaeology of the Basay and the Kavalan. Ellen?
Thank you, Stephen, and good morning and afternoon, everyone on two sides of the Pacifics. I'm Ellen Xie in Hsinchu National Tsinghua University. Today, my topic is unveiling the protohistory of Northern Taiwan, the archaeology of the Basay and the Kavalan. And to be honest, when Stephen invited me to this lecture, I treat it as a course lecture. So, and what I heard from Professor Guan was that most of the attendants will be students from UCLA. So when I preparing for this course, I prepared like more background information about the indigenous communities of the lowland. And a lot of the information I'm sharing today is still ongoing. So I'm welcome to hear any feedback and discussion from you. So the outline I prepared today include the introduction of the lowland indigenous communities of Taiwan, which might not be familiar with for most of you. And what I want to focus is, as was shown in the topic, the Basay and the Kavalan people who live along the north coast and northeast of Taiwan. We'll talk about previous historical research of these people, and also how the archaeological finding in the later period provide some additional insights of these communities. And based on the latest discoveries in the Basay region, we are able to compare it with the sites from both regions to have like more information about the whole region. And following that, we'll have a short discussion about how the idea of Spanish colonialism, the historical context can enrich our understanding of this material evidence, and later following the short conclusion. Okay, when we talk about indigenous communities in Taiwan, I suppose most of you might be familiar with a map like this. So as shown here, it seems that the indigenous communities were distributed in the east coast and center part of Taiwan. And if you compared with the geographical map, then you can see that most of them, it seems, live in the mountain area of the islands. So some people might start to question that what's going on at the lowland, or there are no indigenous community at all. Well, of course not. Sorry. So here is, if you study more into the topic, you may find another version of the indigenous community map of Taiwan, which is like one I show here on the right, include the distribution of the indigenous people from the lowlands. So there are at least 10 of them recognized by the Japanese anthropologists during the early 20th centuries. So these groups of people were documented since the Qing dynasty. And in the document, they were usually recorded as the cooked barbarian. So the term cooked here, of course, doesn't mean that they were literally being cooked, which means that they were civilized by the Han dominated culture at the time. So here comparing, and the term cooked was used to compare with another term, raw, which means the indigenous people that haven't been civilized by the majority of the Han people. So this, and in the document, we see these terms were generally used when describe these people. Although later we know that there are various groups, but their descriptions in the historical record are pretty general. And sometimes it's very hard to see which one is which one. But we know that this group did exist at least until the early 20th century. And during the Japanese colonial periods, they were studied by the first generation of the anthropologists in Taiwan. And their material culture were also collected by the scholars. And the term cooked was still continuing used by the Japanese scholars and government. And we can also see them in the household registration accounts these days. So actually a lot of Taiwanese now, when they want to make sure if they have an indigenous blood of Taiwan, they will go to show their ID to the office and try to request this historical household registration from the Japanese period. So if your record from your family member have the term cooked, which become the strongest evidence showing that, oh, part of your families at least might have the indigenous root. Sorry, I'm not familiar with this system. Okay, so what I'm focused today is the northern part, these lowland people from the northern part. So here I have a zoom in map here on the left side. So you can see that the target today is the Basay people, which is part of this orange area along the north coast. And the Kavalan people, which is the yellow triangle on the map. So the Basay people are based on the linguistic study. They are part of the Kavalan community, and their living location is along the north coast. And here I show you the geographic, the landscape of the region. You can see that the mountain is very close to the coast. So in this region, there's not so many land for farming. So for a long time, we know that these people are live by fishing. Whereas Kavalan is living in a very different landscape. Today, the Yilan Plain is still a very nice important agricultural area of Taiwan, a flat plain and unfortunately also very easy to flood. But today, when you go to whatever North Coast or the Yilan Plain, you basically cannot find like people identify themselves as Basay or Kavalan anymore. But the Kavalan people were still, because the Kavalan people actually moved to the east coast of Taiwan at the village in Hualien since the 18th century. Today, when we use these two terms are still exist in daily life of Taiwan, but in a different meaning. So the term Katakalan, you can hear that as the name of the main boulevard just right in front of the President Hall of Taipei City. I think the name of the road changed in 1996 as the way to show the respect of the indigenous community of the island. And the term Kavalan, you might heard it sometime because it became a famous whiskey brand that produced in this region. Oh, it's covered by myself. So here, okay. Okay, so before the archaeology study of this region, the historical research are mainly focused on the Basay people, and especially before and during the 17th century. That's because they were known as important, this area was known as Jilong in historical document. It is still called Jilong today. And based on the Chinese document, we know that this area was already important before the Spanish arrived. It is a trading center between the Chinese people from Fujian and also the Japanese traders. For example, in the Boxer Codex, the image I show on the right side here, this is an image documented before the Spanish arrived, and Jilong and the people there was already record as an important information for the Spanish at the time. And since the Spanish arrived, they are also like important middlemen between the indigenous group around the northern part of Taiwan and the Europeans, the Chinese, and the Japanese. So what we can see from the historical document was include a lot of trading activities of these people, especially they are usually compared with another ethnic group living in the river mouth of Danshui, which is another side of Taipei. To show that they are, in this document, they are usually represent as a very cunning, active people and good at trading. And based on the limited historical document, we know that they are skilled people. Their living condition might not be very good, but they are willing to interact with people from outside. And compared with all this information about the Basay people, we have very limited information about the Kavalan living on the other side of the mountain, because although the Spanish claim that they also control the Yilan Plain, but actually their control there is too weak, and most of their interaction with the Kavalan people is through the Basay. So the picture of what we see from the archaeological research actually was quite different. So for a long time, the area from the whole northern coast all the way to the northeast part was called the Shishanhang, was belonged to the Shishanhang culture. But this kind of category is quite general and didn't provide like more information to really reveal the indigenous identity. And what most of the archaeology study do today is, if the date of the site is quite late, for example, around 400 year BP, then we will directly, if the location can directly associate with an indigenous village in the historical maps, then usually what we will assume that an archaeological site can directly link to an indigenous village in the historical period. And this kind of research is centers on the Kavalan region, especially the Yilan site, which is one of the biggest biggest village in the Kavalan region. So the excavations started from 2007 and 2008. You can see from the picture on the right that the site is actually right at the center of the present river. So the excavation itself was quite difficult at the time. They have to block the water and take out all the water inside, then do the land excavation. And what they found in this site was, they found two phases. The earliest one starts from 1,300 to 900 years before present. And then later phases can be further separated to two periods. The upper periods belong to the 19th century and the lower periods belong to the 17th century. We know that this is a settlement site. And in addition to the post holes, there are also like more than 90 burials discovered at the time. Now, the discoveries from these sites, along with other similar sites, were remarkable. The most important finding were potteries. Here I show you some examples. The Kavalan potteries is quite sophisticated, and they are fine, and the shape is simple, but they are pretty unified and small and light. Like one of these parts, you can just use one hand to hold it. And their shape become more and more standardized in the later periods based on the research of the archaeology. And the other special material, locally made material I show you here is what called golden cod on the right. You can see that it is like we call it fish-shaped wiring, metal wiring decorated material. And this kind of materials was only found in Yilan Plain and the burial site. And we know that they were like necklace decoration. Other than a special local made material, what was remarkable of this site, especially during the 17th century layers, are a huge amount of imported goods from outside, including like glass beads, Canadian beads, and also Chinese trade ware. And of course, all these materials link us to discuss the connection with the Basay people and the outside world. However, they were based on their archaeological context. It shows very little evidence of cultural change. Instead, what they revealed is really how the local communities incorporate these imported goods to their own cultural practice. So we were going to talk about more discoveries of this site in Yilan. But here I would like to switch to introduce the site of the Basay first. So compare with the site of the Kavalan that was discovered about 15 years ago and have more research. Our discovery of the at Heping Island, which as I mark here at the center of the North Coast, finally give us some evidence, archaeological evidence that is comparable to those Kavalan sites. So here just give you a little bit idea of the location. So Heping Island is an island which is just like 20 meters off the main islands of Taiwan. So in that, it is also what was shown in the Spanish map, what I provided for the post. We can see that for the Spanish, when they came to northern part of Taiwan, this is where they were based. And they kind of, in this map, they twist everything and kind of exaggerate the location. But here we can see that the red dot here on the left side of the map, those are all mainly the indigenous houses. So even at the time, the Spanish also recognized how important this community were. Okay, how we focus on this site includes 3 locations. The first one is the Fort Salvador in what we call Heping A site, but unfortunately, this site supposed to be the original fort of the Spanish. Unfortunately, because today it is a shipyard, so we cannot excavate this site. So the focus was switched to the other 2 locations. So since 2012, there are scholars focused on do a contact excavation at Heping B site. And here is actually the location of Los Santos Church, which is the biggest church in northern Taiwan during the Spanish colonial period. And this is where Stephen can visit at the time. But in addition to this site, in the second half of the season, we also excavate Heping C site, which is the location very close to the mainland, as you can see here. And this one, we believe, is the area where the indigenous communities used to live. So here I give you a bit more information about the Heping B site. As what I show on the image on the left, you can see we reveal the church foundation, the remaining of the church foundation. This is the only construction during the Spanish colonial period we have in Taiwan now, and we are trying to protect the site and make it as an on-site museum now. So here we found like several kinds of materials that can associate with the Spanish, which is not surprising. But in addition to the structure, we also found several, like more than 20 burials inside and outside the church. What I want to highlight it is, in addition to although the majority of these burials were buried in the Christian way, but there are one very clear information as I show here, the one very close to my image now. You can see its posture and its orientation were very different from the rest of the burial. And also it has various indigenous decorated material with her. As I show on the upper part of this slide, including the glass beads, earrings, and necklace, etc. And this one is no doubt an indigenous burial. And we believe that this burial, although it looks like it is, the position is higher, but the date of the burial should be a little bit earlier than those Christian sites, which means that it is possible that the Spanish, this location is possible to be a sacred site or a burial location of the indigenous communities before the Spanish arrived. And what we found in the Hepingdao Sea site is potentially the living area. So this area, as the Qing map indicates here, was still indigenous communities where the indigenous community lives during the Qing dynasty. What we found here is quite interesting for archaeologists because this is the first time we find a long full deposit of the Iron Age sequence in this region, from the early Iron Age to the late Iron Age, and then continue to the European period and later to the Qing period. So, which means that we have a chance to really see the long-term development of the local communities in this region. But unfortunately, although on the site, on the wall of the site, I show you this very clear sequence, but actually the location we excavated at the time was actually where the iron making workshop was located. So the center of the church itself is pretty messy. Of course, it is great because this is also one of the very rare evidence of the iron making activities of this region. But the material, the rest of the material itself is pretty messy. But what we know is, as I show the location of the excavation here, the living area might be close to the southern side, the left side of the map here, and the north side of the west side of the location of the site may be the area for the iron working activity. So all this information provide us for the first time the opportunity to compare the activity and culture of the Basay and Kavalan together. And so in the following, I will show you some aspect of this. So in both sides, we can find ceramic actually from the earlier period in the earlier phase. So these materials, especially the ceramics from the Song dynasties, indicate that potentially Taiwan was also part of the East Asian maritime trade network since the 12th century or even earlier. But these discoveries are still rare, although, but I think it's still debatable. What we can see in the 17th century, the connection between the sites of the two regions are quite clear. A lot of discoveries are comparable, but because of the characteristics of the site in themselves, so what we found is not that balanced. For example, for the glass beads, we can find a lot of glass. Both sides we found a lot of glass beads, but of course there are much more amounts and types found in Kavalan sites than the sites of the Basay so far. And other than the glass beads that were discussed by a lot of scholars, there are other materials I want to show you to see this kind of shared material culture in this region. One of them are the bone and shell tools. Here you can see that, I don't know if you guys are familiar with this. The one on the left, this T-shape material was made by shells, and based on the historical photograph, we know that these are earrings, and the rest were also like body accessories. And same information also happened in the metal body accessories. Other than the necklace, the big necklace I show you in the beginning, that's only found in the Basay site. And others metal decorations, we can see they can be found in a much wider region. And other than these materials, but another topic people usually discuss is the local pottery. As I introduced before, that the production of the pottery from Kavalan was very famous. So a lot of time when we found this kind of similar pottery sherd along the north coast, people will assume that they are all from the Kavalan, or that is evidence of the trade between Kavalan community and the Basay. But what we really found in this archaeological site in Hepingdao Sea was that the pottery, the category of the pottery was quite diverse. So it seems that we are trying to do like more investigation of this part to see where if they are locally made or they will come from a much wider region. In any case, based on our preliminary research, it seems that they are not just simply all come from the Kavalan region. And another research that have been done is about the distribution of the trade ceramic from China and Europe at this period. And in this case, I compared with the ceramic from not only between the Basay communities and the Kavalan, but also with the Spanish church site. So here we can see that it is clear that for the type that was made for the Europeans, they are only discovered in the European site. For example, the crackware I put on the very left of these pictures, and also the salt glassware that was made in Europe. And for the other, like more common and low quality porcelains, as I show, the Zhangzhou ware or the Anping jar or the stoneware for storage materials. This you can find both in the Hepingdao B, the church site, but also from the Hepingdao C and the Kavalan sites. And in addition to this material in the Hepingdao C and the Kavalan site, we also can find like other like low quality, but also more common Chinese materials. And these we don't find, so far we don't find them in the church site. So you can see that from the consumption of the porcelain, it seems that there is a similarity and difference between these different categories. And another interesting materials I would like to share is the discovery of the pipes. So in the site of Kavalan, we found hundreds of the pipes in these archaeological sites. Their shapes are pretty diverse. Some even have the indigenous motif on it. We know that when the Japanese scholars really started to study these indigenous groups, smoking pipe are quite common among the indigenous communities. Of course, we know tobacco was introduced by the Spanish in the beginning to Asia. And the document of how the tobacco was introduced, but there are not so many information about how they were introduced to the indigenous community in Taiwan. And the Kavalan region, I think, is the only region we really found the tobacco and tons of them with different shape, made with different shape and materials. So this is actually a potential like interesting topic to study. And interestingly, so far we find no archaeological evidence of the pipe in Hepingdao C region, which is quite strange. I'm actually not sure if it's something to do with different habit practice or just because the area we did is not enough to show this. But I think this is something maybe will be very interesting to verify for the future research. Okay, so based on all this introduction, I would like to quickly discuss the life and the impact of colonialism of these two groups of people. So what we can see in the Kavalan community, I think most of the scholars agree that is more close to the pattern of peri-colonialism. That is to say, although the Spanish claim they control this area, but what we know is they never really control them, and that is also verified by archaeological evidence. But what is more interesting is it seems that although their culture didn't change, even they use a lot of exotic material, just like what happened, of course, not totally the same, but I think this can be compared with the Ifugao community in the Philippines, that the whole region might be expanded at the time because of the stronger connection with the Basay community at the time. On the other side, when we look at the Basay people, we know they are the middle name, as I discussed before, they are the middleman between the outsider and the indigenous, and they are like, most of them are converted. So their destiny at the time were very different from the Kavalan people. And the previous historical research usually try to find the reasons why they were like good at trading, but still cannot be rich. And the reasons that have been discussed will usually surround the restrictions of the natural environment, the social organizations, or the size of the trade, etc. But it was very rare that the colonial context, their power relationship with the Spanish have been discussed. But this is the point that interests me, because if you compare with the situation of the what happened in the Philippines and other places in Southeast Asia, it is quite unique that the Spanish continue that the Basay people become the middleman to conduct the local small-scale trade instead of using the Chinese people, because we know the Chinese also came to trade. Of course, this might be because the society of the Basay, unlike the Tagalog, which is much more complex and powerful, for the Spanish, they might think these people are easy to control. But what led to this difference is quite interesting, and I think can give a chance to discuss with the context, with the situation happened in the Philippines. And other than this research that mainly surrounded by around the 17th century, I think what we can do more in archaeology is to discuss what happened to these peoples during the 18th and 19th centuries. Of course, for the first glance, if we really look at the material culture, we can find in the archaeological context, there were overwhelming Chinese-made materials and make the analysis very difficult. But I think it's just because we didn't pay attention to study more. And this is actually the critical region, the critical periods for these indigenous communities. And there are at least several evidence have shown the side of this kind of research can be done. For example, what I show here is Han Taoist map, but the incense burner at the center of this temple is actually made by the indigenous community. And also you can see the traditional indigenous element was incorporated, how the traditional indigenous elements was incorporated into the Chinese ritual. So I do believe that more research have to be done in this direction to really show the long history of these indigenous communities. All right, so what I try to discuss in this lecture, I think I can conclude in this way. First, historical archaeology in Taiwan can contribute to the study of lowland indigenous communities. Of course, also other regions. And the case studies here about the Basay and the Kavalan people can see it across the ethnic boundaries that have been set by the anthropology or linguistic, and revealed a long-term dynamic of the two regions and beyond. And to incorporate and reconsider the impact of colonialism will help us better evaluate the meaning of the material culture we found in archaeological sites. And I think because of my background, when I come back to study these regions, I always think about the case studies and the situations in the Philippines, where the lowland communities also deserve like more attention. So I think the case studies here can also provide insight to historical archaeologists in Asian waters. So that's all. Thank you for your attention, and I'm welcome to any questions.
Thank you, Ellen. It's so fascinating. I have so many questions and questions about the research and maybe potential direction later, at least in my own perspectives. But let's wait for the audience. If you have any questions, please, you can raise your hand and we'll give the floor to you. We have, okay, from Dean, let's see. Okay, I think you can speak now, Dean. Go ahead, Dean.
Sorry, I'm not sure. I'm being shown as Dean. I'm sorry, that's actually my friend.
Okay.
Sorry, I'm going to ask just a super practical question. And this is why I joined this group. I'm hoping to launch a project soon with the help of some archaeologists in Taiwan. But we are looking for a ground penetrating radar. So does anybody on this group know where we can rent or find a ground penetrating radar, please?
I'm sure there are some geophysical survey groups in Taiwan, and I don't, Daya, are you still there?